Unless you've been living under a rock or too heavily occupied playing Stalker 2, I'm sure you are at least vaguely familiar with Jaguar's recent marketing catastrophe. It's almost as if Jag said, "Hold my beer and watch this," after watching Bud Light lose $1.4 billion in sales after their marketing disaster in 2023. How completely oblivious and out of touch can you possibly be with your customer base? Many may summarize it as the death of the brand as we know it, and I would tend to agree, but the plot is in fact a bit thicker than that. There is a reason I've waited for the white noise and static of the Jag rebranding controversy to die down a bit. I'm here to tell you that Jaguar was killed long before this rebranding failure, and the marketing department is essentially putting makeup on a corpse and parading it through the streets. I'm here to call out the real killer, and it's quite possible this killer could be driving your favorite brands into the grave also. But first, it's important that we understand the magnitude of what is being lost here. Due to the company's incompetent marketing, there's a poor sense of brand identity. Jaguar can be easily perceived by normies as a brand that makes luxury sedans for older people, if not crossovers for suburban moms. Thus, many just don't care about the manufacturer. Meanwhile, racing enthusiasts recognize the prestigious motorsports history of Jaguar, as it was to Britain what Ferrari is to Italy and what Porsche is to Germany. Friends, please allow me to briefly summarize what made the old Jaguar so acclaimed and distinguished. Also, the perpetual leadership failures that will lead to its death, and what really was the killing final blow to not only Jaguar but potentially the British auto industry. Like quite a few other auto manufacturers, Jaguar's roots began in the motorcycle industry. It was originally founded in 1922 as a joint venture between co-founders William Walmsley and William Lyons. Initially, they began manufacturing motorcycle sidecars, and the company progressively developed into coach building in the 1920s as the Swallow Coach Building Company Limited. During this period, they began producing car bodies for various manufacturers of the day, including marques like Austin, Morris, and Fiat. In 1929, John Black, joint managing director of Standard Motor Company, and William Lyons collaborated with the goal to develop their very own one-of-a-kind sports car. The chassis and engine was supplied by John Black's Standard Motor Company, while the body was produced by Lyons' Swallow Coach Building Company. This was the Standard Swallow, or SS1, and it would make its first public appearance in 1931. From 1935, these models would officially be known as the SS Jaguar. This would be the first appearance of the Jaguar branding. Unfortunately, this would be right before the initiation of World War II, and car production would officially stop for the Standard Swallow Motor Company. Towards the end of the war, on the 23rd of March 1945, the SS car's limited shareholders had a meeting and agreed to change the company's name to Jaguar Cars Limited. And this was officially the birth of the Jaguar brand as we know it. But the following decade of motorsports dominance is what would be the foundation for Jaguar's world-renowned racing heritage that would be respected by generations of enthusiasts still to this very day. Despite the post-war steel shortage, in 1948, Jaguar would produce the XK120. The 3.4-liter dual overhead cam inline 6 would clock an official record of 124 miles per hour. In 1949, it would take the checkered flag at Silverstone, and a year later, in 1950, make its debut at Le Mans. In an outstanding demonstration of capability in 1952, race drivers Leslie Johnson, Sterling Moss, Jack Fairman, and Burt Hadley would average 100 miles per hour over 7 days and 7 nights, covering just over 17,000 miles. Remember, this was 1952, quite an achievement for the time. Jaguar would set an additional 4 other top speed records with the XK120, setting the stage for what would be the brand's most victorious and legendary years in motorsports. Aircraft engineer Malcolm Sayer would join the Jaguar team, bringing with him aeronautical discipline and what would inspire the C-Type, which premiered in 1951. Not only was the C-Type aerodynamically superior to the XK120, it was 25% lighter. It would win the 24 Hours of Le Mans that year in 1951, with Sterling Moss as the secondary driver breaking the track record. The C-Type would then go on to win Le Mans again in 1953. In 1954, Jaguar would premiere one of the most radical designs of the era. This was the extraordinary D-Type. It was one of the very first cars with a monocoque construction, and it featured integrated aviation technology. The unique rear empennage or rear fin is a functional vertical stabilizer that was designed by Sayers. The radically engineered D-Type took home first place at Le Mans 3 years in a row. In 55, 56, and most notably 1957, when it won 5 of the top 6 places, including first, second, and third. The pattern of triumph through engineering prowess is evident, however Jaguar's streak would end in 1957, ousted by Ferrari and then Aston Martin. Breaking into the 1960s, Ferrari would reign supreme. That is, until a certain US-based manufacturer stepped into the ring. Meanwhile, talks at Jag had actually begun in 1960 regarding a mid-engine dual-overhead cam V12 race car. The power unit would essentially be 2 XK6 inline-6 engines sharing the same crankshaft and an aluminum block. The first engine would be complete in 1964, while the completed car was operational by 1966. This was the XJ13. A 5-liter V12 prototype racing car that only weighs 2,200 pounds while producing 500 horsepower at 7,600 RPM. On a closed racetrack in the UK, XJ13 test driver David Hobbs would break a lap record that had formerly stood for 32 years. But at this time in 1966, Ford had already developed the GT40 into the 7-liter Mark II. Given the rapid nature of engineering and development surrounding Le Mans, the XJ13 was already obsolete. It was much in vain anyways. Though the XJ13 development team considered the project a priority, it never was for the company's upper management. It became even less so after being forced to merge with BMC, or the British Motor Corporation. And here we have the end of an era. Jaguar during this period would source their bodies from a company called Press Steel Company. In 1965, Press Steel Company would be acquired by BMC, or British Motor Corporation. Reportedly, Lyons became concerned about the future of Jaguar, partly because of the threat to ongoing supplies of bodies, and these concerns will lead him to accept an offer to merge Jaguar with BMC, forming British Motor Holdings at the end of 1966. It is alleged the government would pressure BMH to also acquire Leyland Bus and Truck, Standard Triumph, and the 1967 Rover vehicles. This could be speculated due to fears of a coming Japanese import invasion of the British auto market. In 1968, the group would officially be known as the British Leyland Motor Corporation, which was the 3rd largest automaker in the world. Think of it as the British GM or Volkswagen. However, the joint venture was all but successful, and this was apparent on the Jaguar front. Due to the lack of finances, the 1970s would be uneventful for Jaguar and the Motorsports branch, except in the US of all places. In 1977, race car driver Bob Tullius would win the SCCA B-Class Championship in a V12 E-Type. Tullius of Group 44 Racing would go on to win the 1978 Trans Am Category 1 Championship in an XJS, winning Jaguar a manufacturer's title. This would be one of the inspirations for Jaguar to return to motorsports in the early 80s, despite their racing spirit and capabilities still being suppressed by corporate overlords who cared nothing about motorsports. Tom Walkinshaw Racing would also approach Jaguar with the intention of entering the European Touring Car Championship of 1982. As reported by the Jaguar Heritage Trust, the regulations prompted Walkinshaw to search for a car with the widest possible tires and independent suspension. Although the XJS was heavy, it met its qualifications. Its fuel injection was also considered an advantage due to the restrictions of modifying intake manifolds. In its premier year, the XJS came second in the championship. By 1983, the XJS led BMW with 5-4 wins, but ended up losing the championship by 1 race. However, during the 1984 season, the TWR Jaguar XJS would dominate, having 7 victories, including the 24 Hours of Spa, which would be the first 24-hour race a Jaguar had won since the 1957 Le Mans. And this was not the only reason 1984 would be significant for Jaguar. The British Leyland Motor Corporation was perpetually collapsing throughout the late 70s and early 80s. In 1984, Jaguar would officially appear as a separate company on the London Stock Exchange. British course, Leyland Motor Corporation failed due to a combination of many factors too long to list, but among them were poor management, significant labor unrest, a complex and internally competing product range, and of course, greed. With the collapse of BLM and Jaguar now finally independent again as of 1984, the heads at Jaguar were determined to get the company back on the right track. Sir John Egan, chairman at the time, was largely accredited for Jaguar's immediate prosperity after being independent. According to a 1986 Management Review Journal article, Egan reported he had tackled the main problems that were holding Jaguar back from selling more cars. He listed quality control, lagging delivery schedules, and poor productivity. He laid off about 1/3 of the company's roughly 10,000 employees to cut costs. Jaguar would not only see an upturn in the market, but a rebound back to motorsport dominance, winning the 1988 24 Hours of Le Mans with the venerable TWR-built XJR9. In 1988, during its premiere year, the XJR9 would dethrone Porsche, breaking their 9-year winning streak, as this was the first time Porsche had not won Le Mans since 1979. Jaguar was like the lone 80s action hero that would take down some insanely powerful villain or empire single-handedly. Designed by Tony Southgate and featuring a 7-liter V12 based on the XJS road car, the XJR9 claimed 6 total victories over the 11 in the 1989 race series, including the 24 Hours of Le Mans. But unfortunately, 1989 would mark the end of a promising and a heroic era for Jaguar. 1989, Ford Motor Company bought Jaguar cars for $2.5 billion. They would beat GM in a purchasing battle for the whole company. They then announced plans to double or triple Jaguar's sales volume. What actually happened was the cutting of jobs and production instead, as the British and United States economies drifted into recession and the luxury car market slumped. By the way, you can watch my documentary here where I explain how Porsche defeated the 90s economic slump and came out on top of the world. But moving ahead, Ford attempted to expand Jaguar's product line with the S-Type in 1999 and the X-Type in 2001. However, Ford's attempts to revitalize the brand were unsuccessful due to financial losses, competition, and quality issues. Jaguar had been nothing but a burden to Ford, reportedly not making a single profit during its ownership. In fact, the brand was consistently loss-making, running up a total deficit of $1.5 billion over its 15 years under US ownership. Ford would attempt to integrate the retail operations of both Land Rover and Jaguar, which turned out to be an absolute failure. Finally, in 2008, Ford sold Jaguar and Land Rover to Tata Motors for $2.2 billion. Or how some would put it, Tata acquired Rover for $500 million less than Ford had paid, with Jaguar tossed in for free. In 2008, Tata Motors would establish JLR as a British registered and wholly owned subsidiary. As Dave Mabel of Car and Driver put it in 2012, under Tata's wing, the two companies are being fully integrated. Think of Jaguar and Land Rover as one full-line manufacturer selling under 2 brand names. Between the two, they've got the market pretty much covered, although important high-volume slots remain dangerously void. JLR underwent restructuring in 2013 and officially became known as Jaguar Land Rover Limited. Jag sales would reach a soaring 42% increase over the previous year, with just under 77,000 units sold internationally. But keep in mind, the king of the luxury car market at the time, BMW, had sold a whopping 1.7 million vehicles internationally. Overall, Jaguar and Land Rover's best year ever was achieved under Tata in 2017, collectively selling 621,000 vehicles. Out of that 600,000, only 178,000 of those vehicles were Jaguars. Land Rover was the primary contributor, selling 442k out of the 621,000. To date, this has been peak Jaguar. Its last year profit would be in 2018, with the once prestigious marque being in a state of perpetual failure to this very day. incompetence can easily be identified as a factor leading to JAG's failed state, with a legendary heritage the marketing department has consistently failed to capitalize on. Though I personally think they did an excellent job with the introduction of the F-Type back in the day. Regardless, while having a lack of clear brand identity, Jaguar would fall on its face competing in the SUV market as if they forgot their sister brand Land Rover even existed. Added on top of this is the fact that they had an aging and outdated product line, a historical perception of unreliability, and poor leadership. While outgoing boss Ralph Speth overexpands the company, leaving it in 2020 after spending $3.1 billion in company investments, Thierry Bolloré would take over, coming up with a reimagined strategy to go fully electric by 2025. Several senior members would coincidentally leave the company after this, including the director of product engineering. Then Thierry Bolloré himself would leave in 2022, only 2 years after coming on board. Since 2022, the company has been led by interim executive Adrian Mardell. Poor leadership, overexpansion, and weak marketing are simply the internal reasons for the perpetual failure of Jaguar. There are external strings being pulled here by an even more vastly incompetent entity. That entity is big government, the British government specifically. Let's just lay down some factors here. In 2017, JLR was the UK's largest automotive manufacturer. In 2018, JLR accounted for 30% of the UK's car production. Also in recent years, JLR had invested billions into the UK, including a new combustion engine factory. In all, as of 2017, JLR's production supported over 40,000 jobs in the UK, with a whopping additional 250,000 related to the logistics and the supply chain. But in 2020, the government will introduce a regulation that would ban the sale of combustion engines by 2030 and hybrid vehicles by 2035. Seemingly oblivious to the absolute disaster they are setting in motion, potentially destroying the UK's auto industry for good while making the country completely dependent on Chinese battery production. The British government was the killer, while Jaguar would completely exacerbate the issue, twisting the knife, completely killing off its entire ICE model lineup in 2024, just in time for a 3-year low of EV sales in August of 2024 being down 44%. Jag's decision to completely kill their ICE lineup also came after Ford cut 4,000 jobs in Europe, blaming losses in recent years due to the weak electric vehicle demand. They would also report massive losses on every EV sold, and that's following suit with Nissan, Stellantis, and GM's failing EV markets. Meanwhile, to try to revive the market, the German government imposes tax deductions of up to 40% for companies on their EV sales. And this just reminds us about the artificial EV demand being produced by governments that essentially entices consumers with government handouts in the form of incentives and tax cuts. It's also worth noting that some say that Jaguar is failing because they are late to the EV market, but this is a bit of a reach because the top luxury brands' leading vehicles aren't even EVs. For example, BMW's best-selling individual model of 2023 was an SUV, the X3. Respectively, Mercedes-Benz best-selling individual model worldwide for the past several years was also an SUV, the GLC. The irony is pure comedy. In an industry where almost every leading-edge halo car is hybrid-powered, and as hybrid sales outpace EV sales globally, the British government has essentially forced an entire industry to put all of its eggs into one basket. Not only has the hybrid market outpaced EVs, companies like Toyota and Porsche have become the tip of the spear in the research and development of synthetic carbon-neutral fuels, also known as e-fuels. Meanwhile, ICE engines continue to evolve in their own right. So if you're an overbearing and controlling government that absolutely must keep a strangling grasp on your commercial auto industry, why not just diversify? Why just EV? And why force it with a deadline? A deadline so irrationally soon? Well friends, we won't go down that rabbit hole here, but if you want to dig, I'd tell you to just follow the money. What I will do is leave you with a proper specum outro, paying tribute to the Jaguar of yesterday.